Question time review part 2. It's good to be back. We had such great engagement on the last video, guys. 23 views in 23 hours. Let's all pat ourselves on the back. We've done a great job. I'm looking forward to this video performing just as well, potentially better. My fingers are crossed. Let's just get straight into it. So, question time 2. So this obviously happened the very next day. This was on the 9th of February. And yeah, straight into it. First question came from Albo.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister. Just now at the National Press Club, we've heard Ms Grace Tame and Ms Brittany Higgins deliver powerful calls for change. Will the Prime Minister act on their call by taking real action, including by adopting firm targets in the national plan to end violence against women and children?
So I'm not going to lie, I reckon the question could have been a little bit more aggressive. For context, this question comes on the same day as the joint address given by Brittany Higgins and Grace Tame. Basically, they both gave pretty damning reviews of ScoMo and his approach to violence against women. So I feel like Albo could have really leaned into that a little bit more.
$2 billion on women's safety has been already committed and spent by this government since 2013. And to correct my statement, $1.1 billion on women's safety in the package that was handed down by the Treasurer in the budget for 21-22. Now, there's $165 million, $73 million. There's $22 million, there's $26.2 million, $73 million. We have targets.
You know, dude's just ready for a question like that. I don't know. Anyway, we move on to the very next question. I reckon this second question is actually why ScoMo was so prepared for the first, because it's almost the same question. So he pretty much prepared for it beforehand.
Will the Prime Minister please update the House on actions the Morrison government is taking to improve the safety and economic security of women and girls?
So yeah, ScoMo just pretty much regurgitates the previous answer. Not very exciting yet, but things are about to heat up because we get the very next question from Labor and it goes something like this.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why didn't the Prime Minister agree to the recommendation of the Respect at Work report that employers have a positive duty to protect workers from sexual harassment in the workplace?
So definitely some emotion present in that question. Basically, the way I think that this question is working is that Labor's trying to make it sound like the Liberals aren't all for women's rights because they haven't just blanketly adopted all of the recommendations. ScoMo's answer is less than satisfactory, I'd probably say. I'll let you see for yourself.
Well, Mr Speaker, 42 of the 55 recommendations of the Respect at Work report are fully implemented and are fully funded with over $60 million in commitment, and work is underway on all of the recommendations.
So yeah, just basically says we accepted some of them and we're working on the rest. So, you know, what more do you want? It kind of intrigues me that ScoMo doesn't explain better why they haven't accepted all of the recommendations. It feels like, you know, if they have a good reason, it shouldn't be that hard to explain it. They've got 3 minutes after all. He just gets up, says, we've accepted some, we're looking into the rest. The answer doesn't really satisfy me, at least. You can decide for yourself whether it satisfies you. Anyway, moving on. So the next question is about international security. ScoMo basically just answers it by saying, yep, we're doing a great job. International security is looking great. And the reason we're so good at international security is because we're so good at the economy.
Australia is facing one of the most significant shifts in our global and regional security environment since before the Second World War. Will the Prime Minister please inform the House how strong and principled beliefs and actions are necessary to keep Australians safe during these uncertain times?
Not a very strong question. I mean, when you think about it, they have the opportunity to come up with whatever question they like and to formulate whatever answer they like. It was a pretty weak effort, in my opinion. Anyway, moving on. The next question from Labor is basically the same as the previous one. Yeah, it's kind of a fine line between asking the same question twice, in my opinion. The second question they asked was why didn't the Prime Minister agree to that particular recommendation? This question is why did the government vote against it? It's kind of the same thing.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. why did the government vote against implementing the Respect at Work recommendation to establish a positive duty on employers to protect workers from sexual harassment in the workplace?
Anyway, ScoMo defers to some other MP to answer the question for him, and he does a better job than ScoMo did. Goes into a bit more detail. I'll chuck up some of his answer here.
The question goes particularly to recommendation 17, positive duty of the Respect at Work report, will require further consideration and consultation to examine the merits and ensure that such a duty would operate effectively alongside existing duties that already exist under work health and safety laws and the Sex Discrimination Act, including to ensure that additional complexity is not created for those seeking to use the protections. Significant thought also needs to be given before providing the Australian Human Rights Commission with inquiry and regulatory powers for discrimination and harassment, in addition to its existing dispute resolution function. And I want to assure the House, Mr Speaker, and to clear up the unfortunate confusion that may have been generated by the Shadow Minister's question, no recommendations have been rejected. I make that very clear. No recommendations have been rejected.
Next question's pretty boring. Comes from independent MP Andrew Wilkie for Tasmania. And he basically says, why is the hospitals in Tasmania so trash? And the Minister for Health just basically says, we're investing a lot of money into Tasmania. We know there's an issue. We're trying to fix it. We're getting there. But at the very end, I'm not sure if he's technically allowed to do this because it's not relevant to the question. But he clarifies something that Albanese said earlier that week.
I did hear recently that, and I quote, we haven't had enough ventilators in Australia. That statement was false. That statement was in relation to a country which at peak ventilation capacity for COVID required 206. We have 7,500 ventilators in Australia. The Leader of the Opposition made that statement and it was plain false.
The Minister's time has expired.
And similarly, the next question for Liberals, kind of just like another disappointing ad.
Will the Deputy Prime Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison-Joyce government responded to supply chain challenges in the Northern Territory and South Australia as a result of recent floods? And specifically, how has this supported my home state of Western Australia?
Nothing too interesting there, but the next question, this is where things start to heat up. Some juiciness incoming. Check out the question.
My question is to the Prime Minister. A year ago, the Prime Minister told the House he'd asked his former Chief of Staff to investigate what his office knew and when about the reported assault of Ms Higgins just metres from his office. How is it possible that he still doesn't know who in his office knew what and when?
Just before I call the Prime Minister, I do want to make a statement about this, and I'd ask all members for their very careful attention. Members know that sometimes during proceedings they might refer to specific or more general legal matters. From time to time, speakers find it necessary to remind members about the powerful privilege of freedom of speech which attaches to those contributions. With this privilege comes the responsibility for us all to choose our words very carefully. The Speaker has discretion to ensure that the House does not set itself up as an alternative forum to the courts or that proceedings of the House might interfere with the course of justice. It's natural that members might take a special interest in a criminal matter which relates to the Parliament or the parliamentary precincts. Nevertheless, such an aspect does not relieve us of our responsibilities. I would therefore remind all members to exercise the rights they have as members responsibly in order not to risk prejudicing any court proceedings. And the Prime Minister has the call.
ScoMo's defence is going to be it's a legal process which, if I interfere with, could jeopardise the quality of the proceedings. The member for Isaacs calls out, he says, cover up, you can hear him in the footage.
Speaker, Secretary Gaetjens advised in August of 2021 that he had suspended his inquiry until the criminal proceedings had been finalised, and this was based, Mr Speaker.
The member for Isaacs is warned.
Mr Speaker, I take the interjection from the member for Isaacs. If he believes that we should act contrary to the advice we have received on that matter, as the alternative he's seeing a
Prime Minister will
lawyer
resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr Speaker. This is not a question about the Gatchins report. This is a question about whether or not it's possible that the Prime Minister still does not himself know the answer to this.
I don't think you're far off it, Prime Minister, as far as relevance is concerned, but I would ask you to deal with the delay issue, please.
Well, Mr Speaker, thank you. Both the point of order and the question asserts conclusions, Mr Speaker, that have not been found, one. And secondly, Mr Speaker, the DPP's position that any further action on the Gatchins inquiry could be highly prejudicial to those proceedings. The member for Isaacs is the alternative senior law officer of this country who would so willingly ask the government to disregard such advice, Mr Speaker, reflects appallingly on his own legal judgment, Mr Speaker, and why he'd be ever unfit to hold that office.
Members on my left, the interjections are far too high.
Yeah, a little bit of juiciness and a bit of heated interjections from the Labor Party in this question. Moving on. This time we get a cheeky question for Frydenberg, and we all know how that went last time.
My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer remind the House of the Morrison government's strong record of helping families and small businesses keep more of the money they earn through tax cuts? How is the Morrison government's tax reforms securing Australia's economic recovery, and is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches?
Surprisingly, there's no interjection first up. Actually, the first interruption of many, to Frydenberg's answer comes from the Speaker of the House. He's all like, oi, the interjections are just way too loud, boys. Calm down.
And we've put the biggest investment incentives through the tax system in Australia's history.
The Treasurer will resume his seat. Treasurer will resume his seat. I'm going to issue a general warning. The interjections are too high. I don't need to issue a warning. I can act under 94A without issuing a warning. I've tried to be as lenient as I possibly can. All members have now been warned. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
So yeah, Frydenberg goes through all the same taxes he went through yesterday. Carbon tax, the mining tax, the inheritance tax of all things.
The Leader of the Labor Party has stood for carbon tax, Mr Speaker, has stood for a mining tax, has advocated a congestion tax, Mr Speaker, who advocated for higher superannuation taxes, higher income taxes, a housing tax, a retirees tax and a tax on family businesses. But most damning of all is the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Labor Party, standing and advocating for death duties, Mr Speaker, death duties. Now, yesterday in this House he called that a lie, but this is what he said in his own words to Labor's Centenary Conference. Comrade Chair, I am pleased to move this resolution which is calling on the government to consider the imposition of an inheritance tax, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Labor Party might want a fact-free election, but the fact is this Leader of the Labor Party stands...
Yeah, and the member for opposition business gets up for a point of order, then the Speaker of the House is like, oh, he's finished his answer, mate. You're too late. So Frydenberg gets away with all of it. But anyway, what can you do? Moving on. Next question comes from the Shadow Treasurer, I'm pretty sure. Before he calls him up, though, he just gives another general warning.
Did you have a point of order? So I think he's completed his answer, but just before I call a member for Rankin, I just want to reiterate, it is very difficult to hear. I will act under 94A. The difficulty I have is everyone's wearing masks and it's often hard to see whose mouths are moving. That shouldn't be a licence to carry on. The member for Rankin has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question to the Treasurer refers to his answer just now. Has the current coalition government taxed Australians more or less than the last Labor government?
So it's a pretty simple question, from what it seems. And Frydenberg, I don't know, he just doesn't jump to it straight away. Instead, he starts to attack old mate. And then the Speaker's like, oi, calm down. Right, we've been through this, mate. We've been through this yesterday.
The hapless member for Rankin, Mr Speaker, the hapless member for Rankin, a shadow of a shadow Treasurer, forgets one basic economic fact.
The Treasurer will resume his seat for one moment. The Treasurer was asked about the differences between the government's taxes and the opposition's taxes. The Treasurer will remain relevant to the question, and that doesn't give the Treasurer a licence to immediately launch into an attack on the member for Rankin.
Mr Speaker, today, if you're a part-time teacher...
Anyway, he goes back to the question, but, you know, with some elbow this and elbow that kind of sprinkled in. Elbow obviously doesn't like that. And he does that thing again where he stands up and he's like, point of order, relevance, and then he just doesn't even have a point of order against relevance. He just...
When it comes to a tax to GDP ratio, we are expecting in 21-22, 22.3. We're expecting 22-23 of 21.4 because we've legislated significant tax cuts. You know what the tax to GDP ratio would have been under the Labor Party today? It's 22.3, 25.9%, Mr Speaker. Every day, Labor was in government.
The member for Dunkley will leave under 94A. Leader of the opposition on point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. On relevance, it was a very short question. It went to the Treasurer has given some of the answers, which are both higher than the 21.7%, which was the maximum under Labor, which was the figure in 2008.
The Leader of the Opposition, the point of order is not an opportunity to state your policies.
Yeah, Albo just abuses the point of order mechanic.
I'd like to help the Leader of the Opposition because he's never held a Treasury portfolio. There's some 1.7 million more Australians in work today than when Labor left office. When more people are in work, more people are paying tax and less people are on welfare, Mr Speaker.
Anyway, next question from Liberal. Who do you think it's for? That's right.
Will the Treasurer inform the House how the Morrison government's strong economic management is driving thousands of new jobs every week around the country, which has the unemployment rate on a path to its lowest level in 50 years? And is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches?
Anyway, he's clearly running out of things to talk about for jobs and growth because, yeah, he goes back to his spiel that he had yesterday about how Albo's too weak to stand up to the unions and Albo's going to join the Greens and we're going to have all that. So there's going to be another point of order. This time, the member for opposition business has actually he's done some homework.
But, Mr Speaker, we can't take this economic recovery for granted. And the biggest risk to the economic recovery is the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Labor Party. And a Leader of the Labor Party too weak to stand up to the unions and the Greens.
Treasurer will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Yeah, on direct relevance, Mr Speaker, I refer to I've got a series of precedents here of rulings with respect to when alternative approaches have been referred to in questions, where it's been made clear that it's not an opportunity to give a character assessment.
Order.
3rd of August 2021, 2nd of June 2021, 1st of June 2021, 26th of May 2021, all the same ruling. Ruling out exactly what the Treasurer is now doing, and I ask you to draw him back to the question.
I have actually done some of my own homework on this particular issue, and there has been quite a difference of opinion by speakers throughout recent years on this issue about alternatives. It is a very challenging area that has I think a lot of speakers have spoken about in the past about how difficult it is to rule on these things. And some speakers have previously refused or disallowed any part of a question that has those taglines at the end of them. That hasn't been the practice of the immediate speaker before me in relation to alternative approaches or alternative policies. It does not then give the member answering the question carte blanche to undertake a gratuitous character assessment. And I would ask the Treasurer to return to the substance of the question.
Frydenberg gets like 3 words out before Albo gets up for a point of order. Anyway, the next question from Labor is an interesting one because it includes the word liar, which is unparliamentary. You're not allowed to use that word in the Parliament. And it's kind of on a technicality might be okay. I'll chuck up the exchange and you can see it. It's a little bit longer, this clip.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, and I refer to his official statement on Saturday. Can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm he has served with the Prime Minister in the Parliament for 15 years? And he has served with the Prime Minister in the Cabinet for 6 years, including as Deputy Prime Minister. When the Deputy Prime Minister says the Prime Minister is, quote, a hypocrite and liar from my observations, and that's over a long period of time,
Order.
He knows what he's talking about, doesn't he?
You can't just quote someone else that's using an unparliamentary term. Now, to use the term liar is unparliamentary, and there have been many examples where it's been ruled as unparliamentary. The fact that it is used as a quote by anyone, doesn't matter who it is, doesn't negate the fact that it's unparliamentary and it shouldn't be used.
Mr Speaker, just in terms of the precedents,
yeah.
We are dealing with something new here where the quote, using the unparliamentary language, is from the very minister we are asking a question from. And of all the precedents, we haven't had that before, and it is reasonable for that to be tested in the House.
I'll happy to hear from the Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, firstly, it's relevant because there was reference to a statement made by the Deputy Prime Minister, so we accept that point. But the assertion that this is somehow requiring a new ruling by you is a nonsense and a concoction by the honourable member opposite. The reality is that the practice is clear in relation to this. It can't be subverted, and I think the ruling is clear, particularly given your words earlier. It doesn't need reinterpretation. It's a cute sort of attempt to work around,
the Leader of the House,
but it's without any substance.
I'm going to rule on the issue. In my view, the precedents are very clear that you can't use a quote to correct an unparliamentary term, and that applies equally in this instance as it does at all times. So I'm happy to allow the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to reword the question.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, and I refer to his official statement on Saturday. Can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm he has served with the Prime Minister in the Parliament for 15 years, and he has served with the Prime Minister in the Cabinet for 6 years, including as Deputy Prime Minister? So when the Deputy Prime Minister made his observations about the Prime Minister, he knew exactly what he was talking about, didn't he?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Not going to be an easy thing to answer, is it? Basically, Barnaby, in I think last year, so recent history, sent a text message to somebody saying that ScoMo was a liar and a hypocrite. And it was because, allegedly, he was frustrated that he was on the backbench and didn't have a real job in Parliament. Anyway, then he got promoted to Deputy Prime Minister for a second time, and the text message was released, and so he had egg on his face. He's like, eek. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. Anyway, his answer is nothing spectacular.
The only time that I've worked as the Deputy Prime Minister with the member for Cook as the Prime Minister is in this time. I can tell you what is different, because I've never worked with the Prime Minister on defending our nation till we work together now. Something that's so vitally important.
It's just how he defends the fact that it makes absolutely no sense. I've never actually worked with the Prime Minister on the defence of our nation, and that is vitally important. Bro. Anyway, the next question from Liberal should just be, have you heard of any alternative approaches?
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Will the Minister inform the House on the Morrison government's commitment to, and record in, strengthening our national security and keeping Australians safe, and is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
Now, I've watched, Mr Speaker, alternative policies. I'm asked about approaches. I've watched the Labor Party over many years, Mr Speaker, particularly in the run-up to the 2007 election, where with a straight face the Labor Party went to the Australian public and they said that there is no difference between the Labor Party and the coalition when it comes to protecting our borders and in the defence of our nation. Now, Mr Speaker, I've seen this movie before, and so I'm watching this Labor leader out there, Mr Speaker, trotting out exactly the same lines as Kevin Rudd did in 2007, remembering, of course, that this Leader of the Opposition was trained by Kevin Rudd. He was the Deputy Prime Minister of Kevin Rudd.
A little bit humorous, but the rest of his answer isn't that exciting. Straight on to the next question from Labor, which is in the same theme as the question for Barnaby Joyce, because it's kind of exposing the fact that a lot of the people in the Liberal National Coalition kind of don't like ScoMo.
Gladys Berejiklian said she could not trust the Prime Minister, telling a Liberal Cabinet Minister the Prime Minister is, and I quote, more concerned with politics than people, and I quote, lives are at stake and he's just obsessed with petty political point scoring. Why was the Prime Minister obsessed with political point scoring during the bushfires, and why didn't he just do his job?
Dutton gets up and he's like, point of order, that's just hearsay and conjecture. And then the member for opposition business is like, but hold on, remember yesterday you said that you can't be an arbiter of fact, so actually you can't really decide what's true and what's not, can you, Mr Speaker?
Leader of the House on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's clear that that is not a statement that has been made by the former Premier of New South Wales, and I think that's confirmation in relation to that, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the House will just stop for a moment. I can't hear. The member for Kingsford Smith should be in Beijing skating at the moment because he's on very thin ice. I'll get the Leader of the House to start again, please.
We would be happy to approve the visa, Mr Speaker, for him to go.
Members on my right
yes.
will equally.
Mr
Members
Speaker,
on my right will equally be quiet.
Mr Speaker, referring to an unsubstantiated media gossip speculation piece is completely out of order, Mr Speaker. This is not a statement made by the former Premier of New South Wales. It is speculation, media speculation, about a tweet that may have been sent to somebody who turns out not to have been a federal cabinet minister. The story goes on, Mr Speaker, I don't know, but this is not a document that can be referred to or a statement that can be referred to, and it's certainly not within the Prime Minister's responsibility to respond to gossip, and it should be ruled out of order on that basis.
I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business on the...
Thanks, Mr Speaker. There's nothing unparliamentary in the quotation that's been provided. The question goes directly to the Prime Minister's responsibilities and the way he does those. What the Leader of the House is asking is for you to start to become the arbiter on the veracity of any quotation that is brought forward in this parliament. And if that starts to become the role of the Speaker, I think it puts you in an impossible position and would be a real change for the way that this House operates.
Order. As I indicated just yesterday, I cannot be an arbiter of fact as to whether something is true or not true, or right or wrong. The question, from what I heard, was in order, and I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
So yeah, they get the question through.
Mr Speaker, as the former Premier said herself in her own statement, she did not confirm any such statement at all, Mr Speaker. She did not. And her own direct contact with me on this matter, Mr Speaker, she has said likewise. So, Mr Speaker, this is what we've become used to from the opposition in putting these matters forward. It's not about policy, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition wants to have a character context with me, Mr Speaker. Bring it on.
I'm not convinced. If he's so confident that Gladys never said that, then why doesn't he spend more time debunking the fact that she ever did ever? If it's absolutely categorically false and not true, it shouldn't be that hard to show it. Just saying, actually, the person who was accused of saying that told me themselves that they didn't do it. It's of course they're going to say that, man, because they're the ones in the final question from the Liberals is just a question for the Minister for Home Affairs, and it's not very interesting. It's just how good are our borders? And then they're like, yeah, they're really good, and Labor's are bad, so vote for us. And then ScoMo gets up and he's like, I asked that all further questions be put on notice. And that ends question time, officially. So yeah, there were some juicy bits. Yeah, some interesting stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope this video was shorter. I guess we'll find out after editing it. And yeah, catch you guys in the next one.